today you had the idea of talking about conflict a little bit.
Well, we've talked about things that might be a problem in relationships, things to avoid. We've talked about some good things, and I thought, it's a natural kind of progression to talk about what does happen when you have some bumps in the road, or when you don't agree on things, or
Yeah.
you have some differences in personality or opinions.
I think people complicate it too much. Whenever we get in a conflict, I just punch you in the nose with an elbow and it's over.
Right. Well, you know what? The reason I'm not kidding, we don't have a lot of conflict in our
No,
relationship.
we
We really
don't.
don't, and so that makes it, or we at least we handle it in a way that it doesn't really get to the point where there's a lot of conflict. And I think part of that is our age. Part of it is just that we are pretty compatible, but it makes it not come to the forefront as far as it being something that we really need to address. But there are things that we could work on for sure. And
Oh,
there's things
absolutely.
it helps to know about getting through conflict, whether they're little or big. And I think there's a big difference between big conflict, like I feel neglected in my relationship, versus like you don't take out the trash. But they can be equally problematic depending on the person and their relationship.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's tougher for some people with different personality types than it is for others. Like I kind of have this naturally really mellowed out personality, easygoing, laid back. It takes a bit to get me miffed at anything.
Yeah.
So I think that helps me a lot, because one of the keys to effective management of conflict is to have emotional control, where you're not losing control of your emotions and trying to maintain a steady view of things. And I think I'm more naturally inclined to be like that than most, maybe. And that might be part of what helps.
I think a lot of how you handle conflict outwardly comes from, what you grew up around. I mean, my family was more volatile than yours, not my dad, which I'm sure drove my mom crazy. I had a friend of mine once say about her husband that he was a Vulcan, and I think my dad was kind of the same way. It was maddening. I think probably sometimes that my mom couldn't get him to be, talk about emotional things. I don't know. I digress, as I say every show. But my family was more volatile. People could get mad, and they weren't afraid of that. What I was going to say though, I grew up not being afraid of conflict, because having a bad day, getting mad, even throwing things, having a fit, things will be back to normal. That wasn't a deal breaker. I wasn't afraid that my parents weren't going to love me again in a few minutes, or that everything wasn't going to go back to normal. My family wasn't horrible. That didn't happen all the time, but there were intense emotions that were displayed, and then people would make up and nothing changed. That's not always the case.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you say that, because my experience was totally different. My mother and father, to be totally honest, I can never really recall them raising their voices at each other in the house. I do remember a few moments of disagreement between them, but it never got emotionally out of control.
Yeah, I didn't really with my mom and dad either too much. My mother was just more volatile. My dad was pretty calm. Do you remember the first time we ever had like a fight? I mean, or anything that resembled a fight?
No, what was it? Because I know you remember.
I do. Of course. But it was just so shocking to me. Yeah. But it was funny too, though, because I didn't really realize you were mad at me. It took me a while to figure it out, because I don't want to get into all the details, but you were irritated with me because I was a little out of it, because I'd had a rough day. I don't even want to get into all that. Well, let me just say, no, maybe I shouldn't. Anyway, I don't know, for whatever reason, you came home and must have like pressed some sort of button, triggered you in some way. But, I was kind of tired and out of it. I had a rough day. I found out I had some health problems, and I was, I can be a little bit of a hypochondriac, and I was all stressed out about it. And I wasn't really watching Alec, and he had gone over to the pond. And anyway, I just remember you just came in and you're like, can you watch him? Because I'm going to go do something. I'm going to leave or something. And I didn't even know you were mad at me. I was kind of out of it, like, yeah, I'll watch him. And do you remember that?
I do recall that now. Yeah. It was early on.
Very early.
Yeah.
I believe we were married though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
couldn't have been very long.
No, it was very early. Yeah. And you kind of left, and then it took me a while, because we kind of text. I'm like, hey, do you want me to start dinner? You're like, no, I'm going to get something. And we had not been married very long, and we'd never had a fight.
Right.
So I was pretty kind of like, that just seems odd. And then it kind of dawned on me, oh, he left because he's mad at me. Like, I really didn't get it. I really didn't even know that you were mad at me. And
Yeah, and looking back, that wasn't really a fair way to.
no, and you said that, but that's what I want to say about conflict resolution was such a, I was actually still going to a therapist because I think therapy is a healthy, awesome thing. And I saw this awesome therapist after my previous husband was sick and died. And I was telling her about it. But what you said was something like, because I said, I didn't like that you left, or I don't know. And you said, I won't do that again. Would you say something like, I did what I needed to do to calm down, but it was at your expense, and I won't do that again.
Right.
It was a very mature way to handle that, honey. And for me, it was very reassuring because it was like, how can you say anything but thank you? Thank you for hearing me and, us being able to talk about it. So that just goes to show that we have a superior conflict resolution ability.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think anybody really enjoy it. Well, maybe there are some people.
I think there are some people who do.
Conflict, yeah.
Yeah. And you know why that is? Let me just get back to us, though, because we have not had any significant issue like that since then. I think I was shitty about something one time, and it was something stupid, too. And but it was something stupid. But when we've had to talk about real things that we didn't agree on or that we're concerned about, we have had conversations, and we can get into like ways that we deal with conflict or things that I think are good or not good, but we haven't had big outbursts like that. But getting back to your point, there are people who enjoy the drama.
Yeah, it seems
there definitely. Yeah. And I think that sometimes it is in a relationship where one person is not getting any sort of emotional response for the other, and having someone be upset with you at least shows you sometimes that they give a shit. And and so I think that's part of it too. When you're unhappy and you can't really just say like, I'm unhappy, I don't feel close to you, you don't have a relationship where you're going to get anywhere with that. Sometimes just having a fight or throwing something or doing something that's going to get their attention is what you do. And I have done that before, and not with you, when I was less mature and and with someone who was also less emotionally aware. And you just, sometimes I think it is not a healthy way to get someone's attention, and it typically backfires. But sometimes having a big blowout is cathartic because you end up making up. You end up, I love you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you're so upset. I'm sorry I haven't been paying attention to you. I'm sorry that you're upset about this. And that is sometimes in some relationships the only way that you get that response. And so you do attention seeking, unhealthy things to get that response.
Yeah, I've seen it.
The other thing though with us is that I think it's because you weren't around conflict. And so it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and one of my issues, and it's probably because I wasn't really exposed to a ton of conflict young, but one of the things about my personality is I rarely ever get angry. But when I do, it takes me time to get over it. It's not going to be over in the next few minutes. Once I'm mad for a while, and it takes me a while to process that out. Where some people snap real easy. Mm-hmm. They get angry at the snap of a finger, but then 2 minutes later, they're all calmed down and ready to go out.
I'm like that. I am. It's not even being mad at you though, but I can be getting ready and not be able to find something I want to wear and be like throwing the hairbrush and cursing, and then a minute later I'm like, okay, I'm good now, I'm ready to go, and that's not how you roll at all, which is good. I
think your way is better.
You do?
I really do. I think the problem with that personality like I got is I probably should be getting angry more often, but I'm not. So what I'm probably doing is suppressing things. And then when I do get angry, that's why it feels so amplified, and it takes me a while to work it all out.
So I was talking to Jason earlier about these different ways that people, some people compromise, some people avoid the problem for as long as they can, and you are an avoider.
Yeah, I would avoid conflict if I could.
But I don't think you necessarily do.
Not always.
If I said we need to talk about something, you're not usually the one to bring things up like we need to talk about something. And if you did, I would be scared for a minute. So if you ever do, honey, I'm just giving you the heads up. Would you?
We need to talk about something.
Would you say something like, we need to talk about something, but I still love you and it's not a big deal?
Yeah.
I'm sure that people know these things, and I'm just kind of pulling this off the top of my head, but the things that most couples have the biggest fights over are like money, money. Right?
Money's a big one. Yeah.
Money is complicated, and it's not fun to figure out sometimes. So it's easy to avoid that one until it gets to the point where it's problematic.
Yeah, and that's not healthy either.
No,
it just makes the argument even worse.
It doesn't have to be an argument, honey. It can be a compromise or a what else? A collaboration or a compromise.
You sound like the spender in the relationship.
I am. Look, we can compete, collaborate, compromise, avoid, or accommodate. So we can talk about all that stuff. But money, I think. What do you think the other things are? Let's just we didn't look this up, guys. We're just kind of. I think spending time together is one, especially for a lot of couples. Men want to do more things on their own, and women usually that's not the case in our. I mean, we're equal. We're pretty equal. But you probably still like to spend more time alone than I do. But it's an adequate amount of time, in my opinion, so it doesn't upset me. No. I don't feel ignored all the time. That's what I'm saying. That really is what I'm saying. And I think that does happen a lot. And so I think there's time. What else do you think? Look it up really quickly.
Yeah, let me look it up. We'll look up common reasons for...
What are the biggest issues, or what are the things people fight about the most? Biggest relationship conflicts.
Oh, the number one reason for conflict in a marriage, with no doubt.
Sex? What is it?
Well, I mean, sex could be a reason, but no, it's communication issues. It's just not talking well, not communicating well, and misunderstandings that cause. Yeah, you do something I wasn't expecting. Well, you never told me, and the next thing you know, you have a problem.
It's a good thing we don't get mad at each other about that, because you don't ever remember anything that I tell you.
Yeah, what'd you say?
I've always said, I have all boys, and I've raised all boys, and so most of my adult life lived in a house with all men. And so I've really gotten used to only about, I would guess, between 20 to 30% of what I say is anyone listening to. I'm really not exaggerating. And so I'm kind of used to that. It can be frustrating, but as long as you know that, remember, I've said this before, there's times when I say to you, I'm telling you something that I want you to listen to. I need you to listen to this. Last night I had a really good story to tell you, and you were tired and you did not fully appreciate it. And it was a bummer for me.
It was past my bedtime. I'd had a long day, and I was falling asleep when you were wound up, and I was going down.
Just FYI, it was 9:30, and we were in bed, and it was 9:30, and I'm like, I've been waiting all day, because we took our son out to dinner with us last night, because we had a bad day at our house yesterday.
We did. We had a bad day.
We had a very emotional day. It was a bad day. We lost a beloved family member, furry family member.
Yeah, we lost a dog yesterday.
That was freaking heartbreaking. So anyway, moving on. It was a bad day. We loved our dog.
So the common reasons for communication issues, financial stress, you already mentioned that. Household responsibilities are a big one. The division of labor.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me, but that's not a big one in ours.
Parenting differences, and that's probably real common with remarried couples with children, where there's a step parent involved.
I wish people could just call me when these things come up, because I have really good advice for all of these issues, and I could help them out. I could, yeah. When you have a blended family, this is the biggest rule. First of all, I'm just saying, don't marry someone who treats your kids badly. And I don't even mean, if you don't like the way they talk to your kids, don't fucking marry them. I'm not kidding. That's not going to change. So, right? Would you say that's intense, or?
Yeah, I would say.
You think that's intense, what I said? Would you agree with what I said or disagree?
No, I would agree with what you said.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. And it's honestly, if there are big differences, if they're whatever it is, it's But I heard this thing when I do believe it, that the biological parent should always be the person who lays down the rules, enforces the rules, and is the disciplinarian. And if you're not the biological parent, you should kind of be a backup. You should be a backup, but you should not be, if you're the one who's, I'm digressing, right?
A little bit, but that's all right.
Yeah, well, if your partner who's not your child's biological parent is the one who's you need to do this right now, you need to listen to what I say, that's not going to work. That's just not going to work. So I can see how parenting differences would be a big thing.
Parenting differences are a big cause for conflict in marriage. Another one is external influences, the in-laws, friends, the jobs, things of that nature. And everybody deals with that a little bit, Another big one is trust and jealousy issues. That's probably more common than you think.
We don't have any of these problems, honey, to any significant
No,
degree.
yeah, what was the one about the kids again? It was
Parenting differences.
the parenting differences. Now, when it comes to parenting differences, we don't have trouble now. I mean, because early on in our marriage, you let me know that when I was beating on your kids, it bothered you, and I quit.
Very funny. Honey. He's joking, so you're joking.
Yeah, no.
No, you know what I think? All these things that you're mentioning, this is going to end up being a weird show. I hope you can make something out of all this. But all these things you're mentioning is
Sometimes it's a challenge.
I know.
Yeah.
These things you're mentioning, what I found is a lot of the conflict comes when people can't agree that one person should be primarily like in charge of this. Not just whether it's responsibilities, but with household stuff, and I don't like Dr. Phil's politics at all, but he had some good advice on some of his shows. But when it comes to household stuff, his thing was, and I agree with this wholeheartedly, if it's really important to you that the dishwasher is loaded a certain way or at a certain time, then you be in charge of the fucking dishwasher.
Yeah. Especially if it's going to upset you.
Well, that's what he's saying. He's like, if there's something that's so important to you that it's done a certain way, then you need to be the person who primarily takes on that responsibility. Now, that's a gross generalization. It is true. And then there's still going to sometimes be things that you have to iron out, but I agree with that. If you're someone who's really uptight about household chores and the way things are done, then you need to be the one who puts those systems in place and is primarily in charge of getting it done. It doesn't even mean that you have to do it, but you have to be the one who's primarily in charge of getting it done. If you are really insistent that parenting needs to happen a certain way, then you need to kind of be the person who's mostly in charge of that. And as in most relationships, I was almost always primarily in charge of making sure kids got their homework done, making sure kids were doing okay in school, and getting them to their doctor and making sure like Alec had therapy and all that sort of stuff. That was definitely my primary responsibility. And it's because I was good at it, and I knew it was important to me that it was done a certain way and that it needed to be done a certain way, and that was something I could do. So I fucking digress again. I'm really afraid that we're going to have trouble with this show because we're kind of going all over the place.
You never know. Sometimes I can pull it out. So another thing that causes conflict in a lot of relationships is stress and external pressures. And this could come from like one of the people losing a job, like getting laid off, or health problems, or anything, these external things that are going on. It's really not such a personal conflict, but that launches conflict because of the way it's being dealt with or the impact it has on the family or whatever.
Right. And it's not, that can definitely cause a lot of stress. We experience that a lot, just having an adult child with a disability. I can be very dysregulated emotionally because I'm worried about something about him, or he's lost a staff, or this is going on. And then there's always work, and then there's money, and then there's like,
yeah, I think if you're under a lot of stress, it would probably be easier to get into conflicts, because of the way you're responding to everything, because you're so tense.
Women, I think, especially really want their partners to just, I've talked about this before, really want their partners to just kind of innately know, like, oh, she's really stressed about this, and she needs to feel really secure and okay, like I'm here and everything's going to be okay, and that's really, and then when you don't get that, you can kind of become a little bitchy. Yeah, you don't mean to.
Become a little bitchy.
You don't mean to, but really you're just mad because you're like, I want you to make me feel better, and you're not doing it. And it's irrational, but it's just human nature. I rarely get mad at you over something that you do. I mean, we all might, you might get annoyed with me if I'm bitching because I can't find something. You're thinking, well, listen, the reason you can't find anything is because you're completely disorganized and you're having a little hissy fit because you haven't put anything away in 2 weeks. But if you said that to me, like, well, listen, if you put stuff away, you wouldn't be upset. There might be some hairbrush throwing.
Especially if I said it at the wrong time, right? Because I have thought about saying that one.
Yeah, and I know our things, Yeah. And here's my thing: when you say something like, "Oh, I don't know what it is. Like, what are you doing? What are we? I don't know. Something like, what are we doing this weekend?" And it's like, "Are you fucking kidding me? I've been talking all week long about what we're doing this weekend. Did you really not listen to me at all?"
I just need a gentle reminder.
I know that, and so I usually will say, "Oh, honey, remember I told you 500 times."
Yeah. And that's not nice.
Well, it is bad. Literally. Last night, this is just a little example. And it's not even a bad one. I wasn't mad, but We stayed up till 9 o'clock while I was putting together a PowerPoint that you were helping me with for a presentation that I had to do this morning.
And I did help you.
And you were wonderful, and you did help me. But then, I don't know, we were going to bed. I don't know what it's like. But this morning, you're like, are you going to work for this thing? I'm like, no, remember, I have that presentation that we worked on until 9 o'clock last night.
Well, in my defense, I don't know how all those things layer together at your job.
I can tell you guys this. I would not have been doing it at 9 o'clock at night on my own time if it wasn't in the morning. So you should know that much about me.
I guess that's a good point, yeah.
Anyway, that's just a funny example of how Jason and I have different things.
Yeah. So I'm reading this list of common reasons why couples get into conflicts, and the last one is interesting to me, and I've never thought about this one, but it's saying having different conflict resolution styles can cause conflict.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Because some people have a style where they want to jump into the conflict and get it resolved right now, and other people need space.
Right. No, there's no doubt. You and I are like that. We just don't have big conflicts. If we did, it would be a problem, because I'm generalizing again. I think most women want a resolution. It doesn't even have to be that you're yelling and screaming, but you're having a thing that's bothering you and you want a resolution. You want to stay in this until a resolution has been accomplished. And men are fine with being like, yeah, okay, I need some space. I need to digest all this, and we can talk about it later. Now, the problem is with men, and I love men.
All right, here we go.
Sometimes that really means I'm fucking done with this, and we're never going to talk about this later. And so, depending on how serious the issue is, sometimes it just means I'm ready to go to bed, and But honestly, I do think sometimes it means I don't have any more bandwidth. Like I can't do this anymore. I'm not feeling the motivation to resolve this. And if that's the case, when you're having a conflict, there's really no reasoning going on, right? I mean, because you're not going to reach a resolution.
Right. Part of the problem is I believe men, at least most men, we're problem solvers. You know, we want to resolve that problem, and if we realize we're not going to get to the end of it tonight, there's no reason to drag it out.
So these things are interesting. You brought up all these different issues, which I think are good and interesting, but kind of figuring out how to get to the end of a conflict, competing, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, accommodating. So, accommodating just basically means like what I said. And I think this happens a lot, where you just are like, okay, whatever you need for this to end, I'll give it to you. That's not...
Yeah, or just not even taking your stance on the issue. Sometimes I'll be that way if it's in my mind, I'll think, is it worth the hassle of arguing my point on this? Because a lot of times, honestly, it's not.
Right.
I don't really feel so strongly about this that I'm really willing to cause distress by arguing about it.
And that's a different kind of avoidance than something is really bothering me and I'm going to not talk about it. This isn't worth having a conflict over to me. Yeah, it bothers me, but I can live with it. That's not an unhealthy avoidance. In fact, I think that's healthy. I think far too many couples let little things become big things. Far too many relationships let little things become big things.
Well, I think it's easy to do.
Well, I think to some people, the little things are big things. So there is that. And I've had to learn that too, because I have a pretty high threshold for a lot of things. I remember my friend Sharon, when she was getting married, she and her husband that she's now divorced from, her ex-husband, had to go to this Catholic retreat thing. I hope she doesn't mind me telling this story. Maybe I shouldn't have mentioned her by name. But anyway, they had to go to this Catholic retreat thing before they got married. I guess it's a Catholic thing. And they had a whole thing about like how to fight. And we were all like, I remember just being like, it was so unrealistic. But they did have a few good points. I will say this. But one of the things I remember that was like, these were pointers that maybe when you're fighting, you could hold hands. And I remember thinking, I'm thinking like that'd
be an uncomfortable way to fight. Yeah.
Well, honestly, when you think about it now, I'm like, it's not the worst thing. I mean, at least you're not going to hit each other, right?
Yeah, right.
But no, it's not the worst thing, because how can you be that mad at each other if you're holding hands? I guess you can be. But I remember at the time thinking it was ridiculous. They also had the thing about you can't bring up past they can't bring up past things in a fight or in a disagreement. And I do think that you have to fight about the issue that's causing the problem right now, or talk about. You're not really fighting. Talk about the issue that's causing conflict right now. You can't be like, well, you also did this the other day. You also, or when you did this, I felt like shit. It's like, yeah, well,
Right. That does happen. People start drawing on historical events to pull it in, and it only amplifies the disagreement. So let's talk about some conflict resolution skills, some good skills. The biggest ones I think are, effective communication skills, which includes active listening. You told the story about being at therapy and they gave you a rock. You had to hand back and forth and you weren't allowed to speak unless you were holding the rock, which that actually sounds a little crazy, but it sounds like it would probably work a little bit because that forces you to listen while the other person's talking, which is great unless you guys are on the ground wrestling over who has possession of the rock,
yeah, honestly, you don't have to have the rock, but kind of getting in that habit of listening and then being like, now, and doing what they say, and that even though it's silly, the way they make you do it, like what I hear you saying is, you don't like it when I do this. Did I get it right? You're not going to do it like that when you're having a real conversation, but that skill of being able to say, what I hear you saying is this. Are you really upset about this or this?
Yeah, and that's active listening. Yeah.
And honestly, with friendships too, when someone says, this really bothered me, to be able to be like, instead of just immediately thinking, well, I did that because this is, to be able to say, I hear what you're saying. I haven't called you in a month and that made you feel like you weren't important to me. So let's talk about that.
Right.
It's like,
that's good. That's active listening. Other good conflict resolution skills are, regulating your emotions, not letting yourself get out of control, trying to stay calm, and then working to find common ground. The best conflict resolution is a win-win solution where both of you feel satisfied with the outcome. That kind of brings up the whole compromise idea. But while you're having your disagreement, it's best to focus on finding solutions than focusing on the behavior of the other person.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason we don't have a lot of conflict is because we have very few things in our relationship where you feel like I feel really strongly about this. We have to do it this way. It has to be a certain way. And same with me. There's very few things that we feel that strongly about that it gets to the point that there's conflict. And so negotiating or figuring out is just kind of simple.
Yeah, I think we're both pretty flexible.
Yeah. A lot of conflict is because that's not the case, right? People are diabolically, or they're diametrically opposed, about, we have to do it this way. We have to do it this way. This way is the right way. This way is the wrong way. And you can't get very far when you're in a relationship like that.
Yeah, that's for sure.
The other thing is to just pick your freaking battles and don't fight about stupid shit.
Yeah, that goes back to what I was saying about, some things maybe I don't fully agree with, but to me, it's not worth my energy to argue it. It's fine, go for it. Then you don't even have to have that battle. But that is conflict avoidance.
But we also, the last thing I even want to touch on, which I think is essential to being able to even have successful conflict resolution, is you have to have some level of self-awareness that, and what you do that might be contributing to the situation, what the problems are. You have to have some ability to be able to hear something and not take it as an attack or a wound. If someone's saying, this is how I feel when you do this, you have to be able to be like, oh, I didn't know I did that, or I didn't know you felt that way. It can't just be like, well, I only do that because, whatever, which is typically the way things go, right? People don't want to admit that their actions or the way they are make someone else feel bad. And so instead of being able to be reflective, they are just defensive.
Trying to avoid responsibility for the issue is what you're saying. Right?
Yeah. Is that what it is?
Yeah, and I think you're right. That's introspection, right? Is looking inward and trying to figure out, did I contribute to this issue? And I think that's super valuable, and I think it makes it a lot easier to come to compromises on issues when you realize when you can own part of the problem.